Okay, so the next session this afternoon, the last session of the day, is a round table on a study that PACJA conducted through Glasgow Caledonian University in 8 countries in Africa. The study was carried out in Morocco, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, Kenya, South Africa. I think those were the 8 countries that we did this work. So Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Morocco, Gabon, and Ghana. So this study was done, the 8 countries, and looking at the impacts of COVID-19 on the implementation of NDCs at the national level. So we have the findings of the study. We have the findings of the study that we are going to share this afternoon. But before we get there, before we share those, I would like to invite 2 of the leaders of the 2 organizations that were very prominent in the development of this study. And these are Dr. Mithika Mwenda of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance and Professor Tahsin Jaffrey, calling in from Glasgow. She is professor at the university and the head of the Climate Change Center at the Glasgow Caledonian University. So without much ado, and as we wait for people to come, because the people are already online, let me invite Dr. Mithika Mwenda of PACJA to come and give us his remarks, his opening remarks regarding the importance of this study and why this study is really important for COP26. Daktari, karibu.
Thank you. So good afternoon. Oh, you know, when we are coming from eating now, that is the challenge. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think. Afternoon. All right. I think we need to conduct one at least a little exercise here so that we all are live up. I know our friend Tahsin is waiting there, but I think, can you all wake up? Just stand up. Let us stand up, all of us. Let us stand up. I can see Agustin. Please, can you stand up? Priscilla, I can see you with your. All right. So, there is a gentleman at the corner there who is still seated. So I want us to conduct a very quick exercise so that we can be attentive. So there is the way we normally do it in our village. All right. So let us raise our hands this way. So if I'll sing a very simple song I was singing when I was a small kid in grade 1. So if you are pay and you know, say I know. Do you know that? No, just keep your hands there. If you are pay and you know, say I know. Repeat after me. If you are pay and you know, say I know. No, just Repeat what I say, not what I've not said. So can you just let me see your hands up? So say if we, let us start now. If hello. Is it that way? That is not what you used to. I can see you also went through that. So can we sing together? If you have a and you know, say hello. If you have a and you know, say hello. Even the pattern, you people, you cannot do it. Just sit down, it's okay. All right, let us take your seat. All right. So, so let me first, I really like the energy in this room. And I can see we are charged. We were missing this. All that year, we were not able to connect. And this is a very important connection. In the morning, we had a discussion, actually a very brief one with the person who is sitting, who is waiting for us there at our scene, on this standing in the Sky News. And I know our YDAs are there, though I'm told the Twitter is blocked here, but I believe that all of us have shared. That was very powerful because that was a very big audience. The early morning, 7 a.m. UK time, interview on Sky News, the reach, the global. Let us appreciate ourselves, my friend. Can we, even clapping yourself, my friend, you cannot do that. Well, okay. All right. So thank you very much, Tasin. Tasin, we have done, as Salina has mentioned, we thought that it would be important to conduct a study in the advent of COVID-19 so that we understand really what is ailing us. You know, the climate crisis is a crisis on its own, and also the COVID-19 actually is crisis. The only difference is that tackling one requires urgency. And the first one, also COVID-19, and actually this is the contradiction, is that when we are tackling COVID-19, it is affecting the people who have caused all the global problems. And now for them, it was very easy and quick to address it. That's why you can see they pumped a lot of money into vaccine, the industrialized countries, the people we actually demand climate justice from. Because you are asking yourselves, we have been talking about money every time, that they say they have no money for climate action. But within just months, they were able to mobilize trillions and trillions of dollars to tackle COVID-19. Why? It was affecting their populations. So there was urgency to do that. But on climate, because now this is very slow, it is not affecting them with the intensity it is affecting us, the poor, the most vulnerable, the communities at the front line of climate crisis in Africa and elsewhere in the global south. No one bothers about that. But my friend Augustins tells me one day, this is like Titanic. We are at the lower deck and we are sinking further and further. They are in the upper deck. You know the story of the Titanic? So that now it is sinking. One time it will sink all of us, whether you are in the rich countries, just like this COVID-19, the way it sank all of us. It's what will happen with climate crisis. So the earlier we understand the connection, the interconnectedness of this, actually, this is what we call a zoonotic disease caused by, we have destroyed the environment, and those viruses have been able now to live where they, remember it was actually discovered where? One, in our animal market. Those viruses actually are supposed to be living in the forest with animals, yet we capture that animal and put them together, interact with them, you interfere with their environment. and the consequences is this now what is affecting us, what is eating us. And by the way, I am now vaccinated. I received the first AstraZeneca, though I was told, I don't know whether it is Serum Institute of India, the one which has been dismissed by EU or what, but now if you are not vaccinated, it's upon you. Please go and get vaccinated. But the bottom line here is that we have a crisis, and the crisis will emerge. What this has taught us is that we need really to be prepared. We need to live in interdependence with nature. We need to be friendly with nature. And one time Wangari Maathai said, if you don't treat the environment fairly, it will treat you unfairly. And that is what we are going to see. And so when we now thought about, yes, now we are talking, now we have the COVID-19. We started thinking about COVID-19. In fact, we have not been talking about it now. We have forgotten whether there is climate crisis. And now we are every time talking about the COVID. The debt, we have been plunged with debt. The World Bank putting a lot of money for stimulus packages for countries. Countries have been, there are a lot of questions on this. So for the people working on environment and climate, we are demanding for just recovery. The recovery which anchors climate change in all its aspects. The recovery which considers the gains which we have achieved on the transition to low carbon, climate resilient future, but which should be fair, equitable, ecologically just, and inclusive. That is what we are looking for. But are we going to do that? Is the global community going to listen to us in the ensuing reconstruction? Time will tell, but everyone is talking about that. Just climate resilient, ecologically just, fair, equitable, inclusive, green recovery from COVID-19. But to connect this then, we end really to conduct our study because our work is always driven by evidence, evidence-based advocacy. That's why we sat with our partners, Glasgow University, and many other African universities, around 10, in these countries of the study, so that we give it that African ownership. And I know we have some of the colleagues here who participated in that study. So why we did this is that COVID-19 has generated direct and indirect fallouts across many sectors in Africa. But the most palpable are, one, direct loss of lives. You don't need to be told that even within our offices, within our circles of friends, we have lost loved ones. So the mortality actually is projected, but actually this was the stories of Bill and Melinda Gates. When we were, thanks God, they have divorced. Now they are not together. So they were telling us, Africa, you will be finding bodies of people all over. We were very scared. It never came to happen, but the prediction was that by 2030, we'll have around 5.3 million people actually perishing out of this. We are seeing poor health indices due to increased mortality and mobility, a reversal in gains from previous public health interventions in a context of poor healthcare systems. You all come from many African countries, and you recognize how difficult it has been. In fact, some of our health systems collapsed when this pandemic came. Some of the countries have not even recovered because they have been fragile it required just a trigger. So that is one reason why we wanted to conduct this. The other one is food insecurity. Disruptions in supply chains due to the global lockdown of markets and transportation have marshaled food shortages and inflation across the world, and even in your country. You can see dawn to dusk lockdown, and this has affected even productivity. Then the economic impact of this is that there has been destruction of livelihoods and the loss of jobs. Many people have lost jobs, especially in the hospitality industry. You come into this hotel, there were so many people who were employed into it. You can just imagine what happened across the globe. Some hotels, actually, the Intercontinental Hotel, Nairobi closed. The Radisson Blu, Nairobi closed. I know there are even others, and this is the story all over the world. So the collapse of this is, so there are no jobs, when actually we could have added more jobs in the market. Now you can see this pandemic really affected this, and it widened, slowed the economic activities, and secondly, it widened inequalities. Finally, it's about climate impacts. This pandemic has increased the vulnerability of populations in the region affected by the adverse effects of climate change, and I've said again, the communities at the front line of climate crisis are again the communities which are facing the worst impacts of this pandemic. So they are related. So whether they are disasters of this nature, actually this is what really happens. And so what we said is that we want to see how these two are related and how we are going to use this evidence to lobby Nigerian government so that when it is doing its green bond, it is not just done in isolation. When it is doing its budget, it's not done in isolation. They have to consider that while you are giving priority to COVID-19 recovery, remember there is another, you see, challenge which we are facing. Please don't slow climate action, because it's going to haunt us on the longer term. So that's why we decided that we want to carry out this study. Remember that our work is always driven through evidence. So we intended that the evidence reflects not only people's experiences, but also personal insights on how they are related with the coronavirus pandemic while tackling climate crisis and the supply for us. And that's why we have think tanks like these universities, our own universities in Africa, and the Glasgow Caledonian University, to supply critical thinking on how some of these issues that emerge need to be included in the current and the future planning for handling the pandemics and the crises of this nature. I normally keep telling people that COVID is not the first one, health pandemic, nor the last one. We'll yet see others. Remember, that's why it's called COVID-19, because there was SARS. There was also Spanish, flu, which swept around 50 million before the First World War. So there are so many of these viruses. So the only thing we need to really to do is to ensure that we are prepared for them. And for us, those who are living in this generation has to learn out of this. So we made effort to the extent possible to reach different groups, subgroups of the population, considering gender, age of those people who are interviewed, people living with disability, farmers, faith-based organizations, and those others. It was a very broad-based kind of study. And so, what we wanted then is how then the question we were asking ourselves, how do we minimize the risk of COVID-19 spread to communities? So we wanted, even when we are doing this, we combine this, and I like our CS Dev Network colleagues, because actually we could have even shown what they were doing during that period. They were also intervening at a very local level, creating awareness graphically and many others. They have got very brilliant people who are very good in art and the graphics. So that was very brilliant. So we were creating awareness to increase, advocacy informed by the findings, which we are going to show here. Secondly, how do we mitigate the poverty and the social impact of this? Because right now, there are people who are not able to feed themselves. So we outlining advocacy recommendations, which Tahsin will do, that respond to poverty impacts, protect livelihoods, food insecurity, and seek to counter social unrest and violence. Because in some areas, you have seen people even rising against these restrictions which are put by government. Because some people are saying it's better I go out there, I die of COVID-19, rather than dying of hunger in my house, isn't it? That's what has been happening, and it is all over. So we really need to look at what are intervention measures so that we stop that. And then also modify existing humanitarian development programs. We have to prepare, looking into the future, like looking at this kind of crisis again, by preparing our African regional COVID-19 response strategy. The African Union actually has developed a green COVID recovery action plan. I think we can share with you that it's very, very robust. The question is whether we end input into it. I did, but I don't know whether that was adequate. So basically, that was the purpose of that study. And I'm sure as a platform, we are putting, handling knowledge, critical thinking in partnership with our member organizations which have that expertise, so that we advance the debate and navigate it. Remember, our work at the civil society is to ensure that we influence. And our window of influence is very narrow. We have to make friends with policymakers. We have to cultivate trust with the policymakers. We have to persuade the policymakers. We have to tell them and show them the evidence that we know what we are doing. So we must be ahead of this. And that's why we have this study today. I think I have explained myself, unless you want to appreciate me with a small clap, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mwenda. That is really well appreciated, and I think you've set the stage very well for this conversation. Now I want to turn to our friend and good colleague, Professor Tahsin Jaffrey, based in Glasgow. She's calling in from Glasgow to again give us our opening remarks and tell us why this study is so important, and especially for COP26. Thank you very much, and welcome, Professor Tahsin.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear, but a huge welcome to everyone this afternoon to this event.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Just one moment.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, Professor, we hear you now.
Okay, brilliant. Let me start again, and a huge welcome, a huge warm welcome to everyone at this event this afternoon. It's an honour and an absolute pleasure and a delight to be speaking with you today. And the words that I have to say really shines through not just the work that we've done in partnership with the consortium members on this project, but indeed reflects the voices and opinions and thoughts of everybody who provided insight and data and thinking around some of the issues that we were looking into. So this event, Road to COP26, Raising African Voices on Climate Action and COVID-19, just sets everything in stone. And the study that we did comes at a critical time right now, with just a few months to go ahead of the COP26 negotiations in Glasgow. We all recognise the evidence is clear, the scientific data is very clear that our climate is changing. It's changing all over the world, not just in Africa. We were hearing all the harrowing stories about the heat waves recently in Canada, in the United States. The Arctic region is suffering a lot. So people all around the world are really feeling the impacts of our changing climate. And we also recognise that these impacts are felt differently by different groups of people. But we also know that it's the poorest and the most vulnerable who have contributed least of anything to climate change, who are suffering the most. And we also recognise that the poorest communities, particularly in Africa, are at the front line of the crisis. And I think it comes at a point in juncture where the COVID crisis has now overlapped with the climate crisis and thrown everything into a bit of a spin, into a conundrum. And the devastating impact that COVID has had, not just on people's lives, but the extent to which it's changed platforms and thinking and being able to conduct business in the way that we have recognised it before. And think in terms of conducting our business, this is exactly how the study came to life and came about. And it really is about understanding what those key challenges are in tackling the climate crisis, given that we were facing, or we are still facing, this pandemic. Not just to look at those challenges, but it was upon us to provide recommendations for climate action and the implementation of NDCs in the wake of this crisis. But I think the thing that's really important with this study is that it provides a platform, a springboard for African voices, with reference to African voices needing and must play a strong role, an important role in shaping climate negotiations ahead of the negotiations here in Glasgow in November. And so it was very clear to us that this is what this study is certainly about. And with that, you know, we did work very well together as a community across 8 countries, as Selina and Mythica have already mentioned. But it is wonderful that even though we were faced with many challenges in collecting that insight and information, 60 organisations provided us with information. We were able to conduct many expert interviews and glean a little bit as to what was happening on the ground. And what is really interesting, what this study has shown, and Selina will unpack that in a little bit more detail as we move forward. I describe what we're facing in terms of the Ds. I always refer to these, the stack of Ds, and I'll explain this just now. We understand that COVID has disrupted meetings, has derailed the NDC development process. Financial resources have been diverted away from climate action into tackling the pandemic. And at the same time, we are witnessing a deterioration in the lives and livelihoods of the poorest people. We're hearing extreme poverty is expected to rise for the first time since 1998, rise by 8%. And we're also hearing some other big statistics around the impacts of climate change on migration, for example. Where the data currently stacks up that 1.2 billion people are at risk of displacement due to climate change by 2050. These numbers are absolutely staggering. So there's no doubt in my mind that whilst COVID is upon us and it is affecting the lives and livelihoods of people, the overarching layer of the impact of the climate crisis is going to devastate lives even further. So our work has shown that what is really important is for the need for a radical step change in how we address the climate crisis. We must see a better nexus in terms of solutions to tackling climate change with different lenses, with different hats on, and people from different organisations coming together jointly from different perspectives to come and to identify some of the solutions. But the thing that really underpins all of this is ensuring that what I describe as a set of values that must be at the heart of climate solution making and co-designing solutions. And that's about inclusivity. It is about voice, it is about representation, and it is about participation. And above all, it is ensuring a gender balanced approach to the crisis. And what I'm trying to say there is, if you club all that together, it's ensuring that communities who are at the front end of the climate crisis have to be at the cornerstone of developing solutions to what we're dealing with just now. So I'm sure you hear a lot more about that with the study findings as we move on. But you know, to summarise in a few words, and Dr. Mwenda has already alluded to this, the world has created such awareness of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have, you know, galvanised around getting financial resources into developing a vaccine in a very, very short space of time. It's unheard of. So a question more than an answer to is, why is it that we cannot do the same about climate change? What is stopping the global community from really pushing forward or tackling the impacts of climate change in the same way as we are witnessing with the COVID-19 pandemic? Surely we have the knowledge and the know-how and the will to do it, so we need to do it. So it's upon all of us to try and push for that kind of like step change, that radical change to how things are done, and hopefully some of the things that come out from this study and from our conversations and through the consortium that we work together so very hard to get the study out there, is to see if it can help shape, indeed influence the conversations that take place in Glasgow in November. So, and that's all I have to say in terms of my kind of like a few words, but I'm just indebted to all the organisers for putting this event together, and I'm sure you'll learn more about the study, how it was conducted, and the key findings as we move on. So thank you very much for listening and for your time, and I look forward to engaging again shortly. So over to you, Selena. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tahsin. Please a clap for her for those opening remarks. Thank you very much. I can just tell you, it's a really exciting study. The feedback, the findings and the recommendations are equally very exciting. I would like now to ask Dr. Mwenda and Professor Tahsin to stay online. There will be questions at the very end for your comments. I now want to present the outcomes of the study. But before I do that, I would like to invite Charles my colleague Charles to come to the stage. I'd also like to invite Professor Robert Onyeke from Nigeria to be here with us. There's also Professor Pierre Kwaku. I don't know if this Professor Pierre Kwaku is in the room. Kindly, please. Soyez bienvenue, Professor Kwaku. Please come to the stage. And online, we have Professor Kumar from the University of Addis Ababa. I hope he's on standby as well. Then we have two researchers from University of Glasgow, from Glasgow Caledonian University. We have Dr. Matar. I hope also you are online and on standby, and Dr. Michael as well online and on standby. So those will be the panelists for the discussion after the presentation of the very exciting outcome. Can I have the presentation now? Thank you.
I think, Salina.
Yes.
I think it would be important, the introduction which you have done. I think it would have been important to just mention background of the panelists, because I think it would be important. I was talking and mentioning that this was not an exercise for only Glasgow Caledonian University. It was a joint work of several universities represented by this, and I'm sure the ones who are seated there, they are representatives of those universities.
Yeah, you are right, and you are preempting it, because Charles is managing the roundtable session, and he has prepared a presentation of the backgrounds of each of the professors the researchers that did the research. So he'll be getting into that. Mine is just to do the data presentation, and then Charles will take over from that. So Dr. Mwenda, that will be taken into consideration. Now let's have the study on the screen. Yes, thank you very much. And as I said earlier on, this was work that was very collaborative between the universities in the 8 countries, but also our national platforms in the countries where these studies were done. Were also collaborating with the researchers and collaborating also with the researchers at Glasgow, and to be able to coordinate this study together. And the professors or the researchers at the university, the Glasgow Caledonian University, were the ones that put together the final products that we have shared again with the professors and our teams in the countries for their final feedback. And that is why we have this product today. So these are case studies from Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Gabon, Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, and South Africa. And I have earlier on indicated the names of the universities that did this work. We had, for instance, the work was done in Kenya by University of Nairobi. In South Africa, it was done by University of West Cape. In Ethiopia, it was done at the University of Addis Ababa. And in Cote d'Ivoire, it was done at the Université Félix Houphouët-Boigny. And in Nigeria, it was done by the Federal University in Dufu Alike. I hope I've said that correctly. In Morocco, it was done by Université Abdelmalek Essadi. And in Gabon, by Université Internationale de Libreville. And in Ghana, it was done by Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And those were the universities that carried out this work in collaboration with Glasgow Caledonian University, in collaboration with our teams in the different countries and in the secretariat in Nairobi. So the aim of the study was to highlight key challenges, opportunities and recommendations for climate action and the implementation of nationally determined contributions during the COVID-19 pandemic and the future crisis of that nature. The objectives of the study were three: to document evidence insights from organizations involved with the climate action in the wake of COVID-19 through online surveys and interviews. Secondly, to identify challenges and opportunities that face organizations at the front line of climate crisis during the pandemic. And lastly, provide recommendations on addressing some of the challenges, as encapsulating the views of the people and organizations who have contributed to the study. And I believe the contributions as well will form the messages that we want to bring to Glasgow for the COP26 and share with our world leaders on what needs to be done. Study overview: the qualitative online survey of respondents from 68 organizations based in Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Gabon, Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, and South Africa. 38 interviews with senior and middle-level employees from government, civil society, private sector, financial research, and United Nations organizations. The key findings are as follows. The first one is COVID-19 has disrupted climate action momentum and activities in the run-up to COP26. A majority of respondents reported that COVID-19 has had a significant negative impact on their organization's focus and activities on climate action. And to use the voice of one person from senior level employee, Minister of Transport, Logistics and Water Equipment in Morocco, he or she says COVID-19 has paralyzed the activity of climate action. For example, of the postmortem of the postponement of the COP26, the coordination is in slow motion. Secondly, COVID-19 related public health measures have hindered NDCs consultations and wider negotiations. Remember, 2020 was the year of the review, and as countries were preparing to carry out the review, COVID-19 arrives and really hindered consultations and wider negotiations. A majority of respondents reported COVID-19 will have a significant negative effect on climate policy and the NDC development process in their country. And we're hearing from a voice from Ghana, from an employee of Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. He or she says, COVID-19 has actually affected the delivery of our activities. Almost all meetings, especially for 2020, that were scheduled to actually advance the implementation of the NDCs were affected because face-to-face meetings were not permitted. Number three finding, COVID-19 has disrupted the implementation of NDCs and development-related projects overall. So a majority of respondents reported COVID-19 would have a significant negative effect on their governments and other development actors' response to climate change and commitment to climate action. So COVID-19, from the voice of a senior level employee, Minister of Agriculture in Ethiopia, says that COVID-19 is affecting not only the NDCs, but the overall implementation of our regular development plans. Now we are trying to revise our plans in order to recapture what we lost during COVID-19. The next finding is the economic impacts of COVID-19 have raised concerns about finance and resources allocated for conditional NDCs. So a majority of respondents reported COVID-19 will have a significant negative impact on the availability, allocation, and delivery of climate aid and finance in their countries. And there was actually a concern coming from the EU that the EU was asking even EU member states to turn around all the money that had been allocated to development, including climate action, and take it forward to fund to address the pandemic. So listening to somebody from Kenya, a senior level employee, Kenya Forest Service, says COVID-19 is going to affect resource allocation both locally and internationally. It's going to delay the process because some of the targets we are to implement rely on finances. The moment funding is delayed, implementation will be delayed. So that is a real concern. The economic impacts of COVID-19 have also raised concerns about the resilience of local communities. And that is why, PACJA, for instance, has started these locally led initiatives or locally led actions to address the resilience of local communities during the pandemic. And a large majority of respondents reported COVID-19 has had a significant negative impact on the resilience of local communities to climate impacts. And hearing from Nigeria, from a senior level employee connecting gender for development, she says the impact of COVID was devastating, especially on early warning, early response mechanisms in place. Business activities came to a halt, movement was restricted, people stayed indoors for long periods of time without food or palliatives. Others took the risk behavior to egg out a livelihood, others quarantined even when their illness were not COVID related. So you can see how devastating that has been. Climate action is a priority for the post-COVID-19 recovery. That is a priority. A majority of respondents reported climate action is a moderately to very important priority in their country post-COVID-19 recovery plan. So post-COVID, we really need to put plans in place. Hearing from a voice from Ghana, from Abantu for Development, Ghana's government aims to use the recently launched National Adaptation Plans process to build back better, ensuring that post-COVID recovery investments and stimulus packages are climate-proof. Now, civil society has a major role to play in shaping implementation and raising ambitions for NDCs and climate action. This is the role of civil society. All the findings that we've had, this is one that focuses mostly on the role of civil society. An overwhelming majority of respondents reported civil society and social movements should have an important role in guiding climate action post-COVID-19 in their country. And a voice from South Africa, from a senior level employee, Southern African Green Revolutionary Council says the post-COVID-19 should be driven from below with more informed participation to determine a future which is just and sustainable with more respect of human rights, the rights of nature, including restoration of people's dignity. And so those were the findings that came out overwhelmingly from the majority of respondents that were interviewed during this process. Now, let's look at the recommendations and see how we can actually turn these recommendations into those messages I said that we can bring to Glasgow. Climate change should be treated as an emergency in the same way as COVID-19 pandemic. Tackling climate change as an issue of emergency as it is being done to COVID-19, I think the same attention should be given to climate change because of the consequences it has on the lives of people, especially those living under poor conditions. This is a voice from Ghana, from Senior Level Employees Strategic Youth Ghana. A holistic approach to COVID-19, climate change, and other social challenges is needed. So these are two voices, one from Ivory Coast, from Cote d'Ivoire, and the other one from Gabon. From Gabon, the situation created by COVID-19 should be taken advantage of to forge links, synergies, complementaries between the different sectors through the SDGs and the objectives of the NDCs. And from Cote d'Ivoire, from ONG PACJA, new plans and programs should take into account the correlation between health and human living environment in their irreversibility relationship and development and develop the precautionary and preventive capacity in order to strengthen the resilience of population in the face of the threats globally. So a holistic approach in addressing COVID and the other development issues is really required. Adapt to COVID-19 response coordination strategies to climate action efforts. The major lesson that I saw that during this COVID-19 pandemic, the coordination that we have never seen before between stakeholders, be it non-governmental, government and private, NGOs, different stakeholders, but this only happens because of the pandemic. This is a lesson that we need to somehow build upon for the future. A voice from Senior Level Employee, Environment, Forest and Climate Change Commission, Ethiopia. And this is a reality. 2020, we saw how we all rallied together. Conversations between the global South and the global North, between civil society and the private sector and government. Everybody was so concerned about the pandemic. How come we don't do that around other issues. Climate change, for instance, I think that is the question that needs to be addressed. Dedicated domestic and international funding to finance a climate resilient vocabulary. We are hearing from a voice from Ghana. My first point on the actions would be getting a dedicated domestic funding, because that is the foundation of everything that we want to do as a country. So going forward, as a country, with the understanding that COVID has actually made us understand that we have to be on our own to do a lot of things. Follow the lessons on raising awareness and rapid knowledge co-production learned as part of the pandemic response. Knowledge generation from Morocco, knowledge generation together with awareness creation are two important issues that we had learned from the country's response to COVID-19. Another important lesson that we had learned is with regards to coordination. The coordination among various stakeholders for addressing COVID-19 was very good, and we've just repeated that. We need to have similar coordination mechanisms for climate action. Why can't we do that? A renewed focus on government intervention. The entire world did realize that government is the go-to in the pandemic response. It was not NGOs or civil society. They did their bit. Don't get me wrong, but the government played the biggest role through lockdown. Who locked people down? That was the government. Social protection measures and other strategies. That tells us we should look more to the government to act. They should do more in taking action in climate action. We are hearing this from an employee, the African Center for Technology Studies in Kenya. Promoting innovation and digital connectivity. The huge implementation of digital advocacy by civil society organizations has really helped to strengthen and sustain climate action during COVID-19 pandemic. This should be replicated by other countries. This is a message coming from senior level employee, Ecosic Kyle, I think Limited Nigeria. Taking different tasks virtually became the new normal. This may create a good opportunity to work virtually with all, also from different parts of the country, towards finding solutions for such kind of crisis. This is a voice coming from Multilateral Environmental Agreements Coordination Directorate from Ethiopia. So you can, as you can see, we got voices from all of us showing people's response and how they responded to the questions. And I think the recommendations are equally very important, that we need to really link those recommendations and what we need to be talking about towards the end of the year in Glasgow. So now I would like to turn over the session to Charles, who is going to be having really interesting conversations. Those messages and those recommendations and those highlights from the findings came from these researchers who are here with us today. I think they listened to the voices that they themselves collected. But Charles, I think, has more directed questions as to what next from this study. How do we make this study work? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarina, for that summary. I think it was very well captured, and we were able to listen to that summary of that important study that, like you've been told, it was done, collectively by about 9 universities, that is including Glasgow Caledonian University and other 8 universities in Africa. Now, today we are privileged to have some of the researchers that took part in that particular study. And we are joined by Dr. Sena Matal, who was actually coordinating this from Glasgow Caledonian University. He's joining us online all the way from Glasgow. And he is a research fellow at the Center of Climate Justice at Glasgow Caledonian University. But we also have Dr. Michael Mikruet, who is also a research fellow at the Center of Climate Justice in the same university, that is in Glasgow. But present here with us, we have Dr. Robert Onyeneke. And Dr. Robert Onyeneke is an associate professor at the Department of Agriculture, particularly specializing in resource and environmental economics, and that is at the University of Alex Ekwueme Federal University, Dufu, that is in Nigeria. But he is also the acting director for the Center of Internalization, Linkages, Advancement, and Global Ranking. And Professor, you can raise your hand so I can see you. We are also privileged today to have Dr. Koku Pierre, and he's from the University or Université Félix Houphouët Boigny, that is from Ivory Coast. And also joining us online, we have Professor Satish Kumar, who is from the University of Addis Ababa. He's joining us. He was to be with us in this conference, but he didn't manage because of a few things, so he's joining us also online. Now, that is the panel that we're going to have today, and we'll engage with them, in a number of questions. And again, we shall get an opportunity to get questions from the plenary, and together we'll actually be able to interrogate this study and probably think about how do we move, the recommendations, forward from here. Now, to start us off, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask a question that is going to go to all our panelists. And we are going to start from Dr. Robert Onyeneke, who is here. And I want to ask this question, that we also go to the other panelists. Having listened to the outcome of this study, which you actually participated in developing, what actually do you make out of this study generally? In a few minutes, what do you think, is really the meaning of the outcome you are now seeing from this study?
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. I'll first of all like to thank and congratulate PACJA and Glasgow Caledonian University for first of all trying to attempt to explore these two different crises facing the world and how they relate to each other. Those of us in academic institutions, like you will understand, we have an important role to play in terms of research. We teach, we do research, and we also do public or community service. So we have not really attempted, many of us, if you go through the literature and all that, you will find that this is an area no one actually has attempted, and if you find some, it could be one or two. So it is really interesting to be part of this study. I thank you for that initiative. Going forward from the outcomes of this study, the findings, what will stakeholders being led by PACJA do with this? I think there are important opportunities there. The first I would say is the COP26 coming, the findings of this study, if you will have a place, a kind of side event somewhere in COP where this can actually be showcased. I will tell you that you are going to have many audience to listen to these, especially those coming from the universities and even policymakers. At the same time, at that level, it is very important coming down to the different countries, not just the countries that participated in the study, but even other countries around Africa and even beyond Africa. There are also lessons for their governments and even stakeholders. If you look at the findings, one key finding there is the coordination that happened during the pandemic among the different stakeholders. It shows us that if we have that if we really want to do something, we can do something. So I see that willpower to take climate change actions that same way we have taken COVID-19, I have not seen that flare. So I think this study has once demonstrated that, see what we did during this pandemic. If we show the same commitment towards climate action, we can do better for climate action. Again, the findings of this study also is important to civil society groups. This can form the basis of their advocacy to government, especially now that many governments are revising the NDC. So it will be important to find a way to take findings of this study, use it, mainstream these findings in the revision of the NDC. I happen to be one of the people that did a paper on the revision of the NDC, especially the agri sector. So there are a lot of gaps in the current NDC we have. So COVID-19 pandemic and the response measures we have adopted so far could as well be integrated as part of the processes to achieving ambitions of our NDC. At the same time, this study and the pandemic as well have told us how vulnerable we are. We are really vulnerable, the health sector, even all the sectors, agri sector and all that. It is a serious shock that must be taken seriously. So there are lessons across all the important stakeholders, even those in the university, those in research institutions. This same study will definitely stimulate debate among these researchers to now begin to look at the different themes of this study, go further and in details to bring out more and more findings, explore this further. So I see this as a foundation study in relation to climate action and COVID-19. So those in the university will find it interesting, very, very interesting, because once they see this, they will now begin to see where to enter and how to enter to do their research. And the methodology is also interesting, very interesting methodology, because it is mixed method. And because it is mixed, it takes care of the weaknesses in the qualitative and quantitative part of the study, researches. So that mixed and participatory approach of the study makes it more qualitative, and that was why I had to first congratulate PACJA and Glasgow Caledonian University for initiating this interesting study. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Onyeneke. That's quite comprehensive. Dr. Pierre Koku.
Merci. Je suis Dr. Pierre Guadio. Je suis de l'Université Félix-Auboigny du Côte d'Ivoire. Je représente ici le professeur Yako Koré, qui m'a mandaté donc de participer donc, à cette conférence. Je n'ai pas pu être là. Je voulais remercier tous les organisateurs donc, de cette conférence et qui ont mobilisé les moyens pour que cette conférence se tienne ici, malgré donc l'avènement de la COVID-19 et tous les différents acteurs et partenaires financiers qui ont permis que cet événement important puisse se réaliser ici. Alors, je suis son assistant et lorsque cette étude est venue, nous avons trouvé cela que c'était très important parce que au niveau donc des universités, beaucoup de travaux ont été impactés donc par l'avènement de Covid. D'abord au niveau des universités. En en prenant en compte donc, celle donc, des organisations de la société civile. Nous avons trouvé ça très, très important, dans la mesure où toutes les activités, les programmes qui devaient se faire en conformité donc, avec les CDN n'ont pas pu se réaliser comme il se devait. Donc, lorsque nous avons été approchés au niveau de l'université pour mener une telle étude, nous avons trouvé cela très important pour la suite, parce que les résultats donc, de cette étude donc, peuvent aider pour pouvoir résoudre les problèmes futurs par rapport donc, à la COVID-19, qui est une pandémie qui est arrivée indépendamment de nous, et aussi de phénomènes liés au climat. Donc, les changements climatiques, comme le veuille ou non, demeurent, ainsi que la COVID et bien d'autres pandémies qui viendraient. Donc, c'est en cela qu'à travers donc, cette étude, nous avons réfléchi ensemble, et au niveau national, nous avons mis en place un protocole. Et dans ce protocole, nous avons, dans un premier temps, documenté au niveau national quelles sont les différentes organisations, la société civile, les institutions étatiques et non étatiques, qui pouvaient nous donner donc, des éléments de réponse, certainement qui participent activement donc, au CDN au niveau national. Et lorsque nous avons fini de faire cette approche, nous sommes rendus compte que beaucoup de ces organisations, tant au niveau de la société civile qu'au niveau donc, des organisations de l'État, qui sont impliquées donc, dans les changements climatiques, n'ont pas pu réaliser donc, leurs différentes activités qui avaient été prévues à cause de l'avènement de la COVID. Donc, vous voyez que la COVID-19 a impacté considérablement, significativement sur les différentes activités. Donc, ce que nous retrouvons, c'est qu'à travers les différentes recommandations qui ont été faites par, je vais être bref, par les différentes organisations, nous retenons à différentes échelles que grâce donc, à l'avènement de COVID, et vu que les gens n'ont pas pu réaliser des activités comme ils s'y devaient, puisqu'il y avait des difficultés de se rencontrer, alors ils ont réfléchi autrement pour mettre en place donc, des systèmes qui étaient plus faciles pour pouvoir atteindre leurs résultats, notamment dans le domaine de l'agriculture. Nous avons vu que certaines organisations ont dit que certains agriculteurs avaient du mal à importer donc, des pesticides pour l'agriculture à cause de l'avènement du Covid. Mais vu que ces intrants ne venaient pas, alors qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait? Ils ont réfléchi sur d'autres approches, sur les agricultures faites à base donc, des méthodes biologiques. Donc, je pense qu'à la longue, les résultats de cette étude-là devaient servir à toutes les organisations et institutions au niveau national comme international pour pouvoir améliorer nos différents projets de développement. Et en même temps, on doit prendre en compte, en dehors de ce que les différentes conclusions qui vont être prises donc, à la COP26, on doit statuer sur les résultats de cette étude, on doit les considérer, de sorte que les différentes organisations de la société civile puissent effectivement réaliser leurs travaux dans les conditions normales. Ensuite, je dirais que cette étude est importante dans la mesure où les différents opérateurs donc, de la société civile qui, tant soit peu, se sont engagés donc, à faire donc, des projets, n'ont pas pu le faire. Et manque donc de financement, manque donc de rencontres physiques, manque donc de moyens. Alors, cette étude a révélé effectivement qu'il était important pour les différents acteurs de la société civile engagée donc, dans les contributions déterminées au niveau national, de pouvoir réfléchir autrement avec l'avènement de la COVID-19 pour pouvoir résoudre donc, les différents problèmes. Donc, je ne vais pas être long, je vais attendre donc, les autres questions pour pouvoir répondre de manière précise à vos différentes préoccupations. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Pierre. And now we take a flight. We go all the way to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And that's how we find Professor Satish Kumar Balithathan, who is going to give us his remarks, in terms of the general view of the outcome of this study. Professor Satish Kumar, if you can hear me, take the floor.
Yes, Charles, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you very much. First of all, my congratulations to PACJA for the conference. I think, I'm a witness to the resilience that PACJA has in terms of leading the climate justice movement in Africa. So I'm really honored to be associated with PACJA and the movement that it is leading, and to Dr. Mitika and all of you. And also congratulations to the team, PACJA and the Glasgow University for having come up with this study. And warm welcome to all the participants, and apologies I couldn't be there because I'm one of the guys who was infected with COVID and really suffered because I couldn't get vaccinated on time. And it is really it's really a serious disease if somebody gets infected anyway. So I think in terms of the general opinion, I would say that I'll pick two things. One is the lessons learned in terms of the coordination that actually we had seen in the presentation. And I would like to link it with what Dr. Mitika had mentioned, because this is not the only thing that we are going to have. As we are destroying our biodiversity in a faster pace, in the future, the pandemic is going to also, it is assumed that we will have more such pandemics. So I think, the coordination in terms of how countries responded to the pandemic, shutting down, say, overnight, shutting down the economy-wide activities, and then also doing adaptive management, coming back after 10 days, 15 days, again, trying to open up some sectors of the economy like agriculture, construction that was opened. So, that kind of coordination mechanism where there was a top-down, systematic, full-fledged and fully forced kind of, I'm talking about the government ministries, and they responded. So Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, so they all responded. So what can we, those are the lessons that we need to pick up for the climate actions. I think the second important general comment that I would say is that it's going to be a challenging time, because the pandemic also has clearly shown that it sucked out all the money that was meant for, say, developmental activities, also for climate action. So now, but we have, all of us have updated our NDCs. So I was privy to the updated NDC of Ethiopia because there was a validation workshop a couple of days ago, and so the Ethiopian NDC now asks for $300 billion until 2030 in order to actually meet its targets, and out of which 80% are conditional in nature. So now where does that money come from? So globally there is, as you know, finances are very few to come by, and I know Mitika had been a leader in Africa asking for that $100 billion. That's also not on the plate. So I would also take this lesson of how do we readjust ourselves and see what kind of movement and advocacy is needed, actually also the public diplomacy that is needed in order to get to have our actions taken care of. So I will stop here for now, but I will come back later on. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you so much, Professor, and please hold on because we have several more questions for you later. But now we want to shift gears and take another flight all the way to Glasgow. And I want to invite Professor Michael to also give us his general view regarding the outcome of this study. Dr. Michael, if you can hear me.
Yes. Hi, yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, so thank you very much for having me. It's great to see that kind of level of interest in the findings of this study. I just have a few very quick observations about this study and some reflections based on what we found. So I think one of the panelists actually was saying that the coordination that accompanied COVID-19 was of the kind rarely seen before, even though many of our interviewees and survey respondents said that if you look at the numbers, climate change will be more impactful in the long run. Unfortunately, that kind of coordination and commitment isn't isn't there for adapting to and mitigating climate change. And that's probably because climate change is such a slow onset kind of disaster usually. I'm not talking about typhoons and natural disasters that are visible without any kind of long-term observation. But in many ways, climate change unfolds over years and decades, and it's very difficult to convince not only policymakers and funders, but also the public about its importance and its urgency. What we did learn from the COVID-19 pandemic is that there definitely are ways for educating the population really quickly about catastrophes, about disasters, about crises. In less than a year, virtually the entire planet has been educated on what COVID-19 is, how to prevent it, how to stop it from spreading, and so forth. It's a huge educational effort. And I think that we need something of the same sort for climate change, even though, like I said, it's much more difficult to convey that urgency of climate change compared to a global pandemic. But there definitely are some lessons to be learned here. And another thing that I think the study brings to the conversation about how to deal with climate change and how to promote more ambitious NDCs is that, up until now we had colloquial evidence, we had anecdotal evidence that the pandemic has impacted negatively the NDC process and climate change mitigation. But now we have the numbers, now we have evidence to show, like, indeed, that is happening across the continent. And it was very, very interesting to me personally to see that in-person meetings and face-to-face meetings, face-to-face interaction is so important in finding common goals and agreeing on common targets. Apparently, based on the evidence we have received, we've heard online meetings are not the same. And obviously, I would, and Sen as well, I'm sure we would prefer to be there with you today, and that would lead to much more personal connections and better discussions. So, and that's just an example of how important actually meeting in person is, and that's something that was conveyed in the study. And finally, I think one of the lessons, at least for me, the way I see it, is that when there's a crisis, we look up to the government, to the commons. So we don't look for widespread support only from the NGOs or from businesses. At least here in Europe and to an extent also in Africa, it's the governments that spearheaded the response. And I think, in the age of neoliberalism and erosion of government powers in many places in the world, that's also a lesson to be learned, that, and we also learned that in the 2007-2008 crisis, that the government ultimately takes the lead because, that is expected from the government. That's what the government is for. So I think that's all. These are my takeaways from this study. So I'm gonna stop here and see if there are any questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michael, for those very good remarks. And I should say Dr. Michael was working closely with Dr. Martha Senan, and of course, under the leadership of Professor Tahsin Jaffrey. So now I want to introduce Dr. Michael. And Michael, as you make your remarks, probably you can tell us why it's coming out very clearly that these two emergencies, that is COVID-19 and climate change, need to be addressed, together, as one. So Dr. Martha, kindly come on board.
Certainly, and again, thank you for having me. And I would just like to echo what some of my colleagues have been saying, that this report and this study has really much been driven by the African organizations that were contacted as part of this project, and in coordination with PACJA and all its partners. And this has essentially been a very good process for moving us away from anecdotal evidence and to really putting on paper what the challenges of COVID-19 mean for climate change in action. And because as we know, that obviously representation of African organizations at COP are often being quite underrepresented. And so we're essentially very happy, privileged to be assisting PACJA to get these messages into the general conversation at COP. Is certainly the case because, as we know, Africa obviously it contributes very little in terms of global greenhouse emissions, yet faces some of the worst impacts of climate change. But what we have seen from the report most strongly is that obviously African organizations are at the front line of fighting climate change, but they are doing a lot of progress, a lot of ambition to address climate change. But we also see many of these climate actions, NDCs, are conditional on receiving financial support and technology transfers from the industrialized world. So there is a real hard conversation to be had at COP on what are the commitments between nations, how certainly the industrialized nations can play their part in supporting African organizations to really deliver on climate action. So I think this report has come at a very vital time where the conversation needs to be had at these COPs that the economic fallout of coronavirus cannot stop ambition. It cannot curtail resources dedicated to climate action if we are to achieve it effectively. So, as I say, this report helps to address some of these issues which have been talked around in the peripheries. But now we have the voices of organizations who are on the front line, who can really hammer home these messages as we approach COP. So again, very happy to have been working with PACJA to deliver this and look forward to any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matal, and thank you so much for your technical leadership in coordinating all this. I remember we had countless meetings, even at night, trying to coordinate this, but thank you. I'm sure you're excited that the product is now ready. Now, two more questions, and I want to direct this question to Dr. Onyeneke. You know, this study was done in year 2020, but it's also the year that the countries were supposed to review the NDCs. But again, by this above that year, very few countries were able to meet the deadline set by the UNFCCC. Now, what do you think caused the delay? And again, you know, what future do we have, you know, in terms of now implementation of the documents that are being revised by the countries?
Thank you very much. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the world. In fact, the world was not expecting that. And 2020, like you said, parties were also supposed to submit the revised NDC, because every 5 years they should do that. Since the Paris Agreement was 2015, I think after 5 years, then 2020. I think what that's also the coming of the pandemic, what it also cost the more was that parties, countries, they should meet actually. It was expected that there should be high level of coordination at that particular point in time in trying to put things together for the revised NDC. So the lockdown measures in place last year really put everything to a halt. So travel restrictions and all that, people moved online, most activities went online. But we also understand that even the online activities, they were not as effective and as efficient it should be. Many people sometimes would say, I will join, but due to network hitches and all that, it couldn't also happen very well. So now, even tracking the progress made so far by way of data collection, travel restrictions and all that, I believe affected all that. So now these that affected many countries couldn't submit their revised NDC. If you go to the NDC website on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, you will find out that many parties have not submitted their revised NDC. So the COVID-19 pandemic affected all processes put in place to revise that NDC and have a final document probably to submit at COP26 that was supposed to held last year at Glasgow. So I think it actually affected all efforts to submit that. And you now see that the momentum is just gradually coming up because we are learning somehow on how to manage the pandemic, the vaccines and all that. We can now start meeting face to face and all that. So hopefully parties will submit their revised NDC before November, December COP. I know Nigeria has submitted a kind of interim kind of report to the UNFCCC. So hopefully before that time, we will finalize everything and get it submitted to the to UNFCCC. So I think the pandemic actually affected parties' processes put in place to revise the NDC and get it submitted last year. So that's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I want to invite Dr. Koku, as you make your remarks on the same. We are talking about revising the NDCs and submitting revised versions of the same.
Oui, moi je pense que c'est tout naturellement, il va falloir réviser les documents dans la mesure où ces documents avaient été établis avant qu'il y ait l'avènement de la COVID. Et voilà qu'aujourd'hui nous sommes confrontés au Covid-19. Donc, on a deux challenges. Le challenge donc de lutter contre les changements climatiques et l'autre challenge c'est de lutter contre la survie, puisque le virus on ne le voit même pas du tout et il tue les gens. Aujourd'hui, les pays développés ont les moyens, ils développent des vaccins, ils aident à couvrir une grande partie de la population. Mais l'Afrique a des difficultés parce que nous n'avons pas les moyens qu'il faut pour faire les vaccins. Et même si on a des chercheurs qui ont des connaissances, des compétences intellectuelles pour pouvoir faire les vaccins, on n'a pas les moyens pour les vulgariser. Là, c'est un problème. Donc, il va falloir repenser, revoir ces différentes stratégies, les contributions de ces pays, nos différents pays, le pays d'Afrique, en adéquation avec la lutte contre cette pandémie. Les deux doivent se faire ensemble. Mais je pense, dans un premier temps, il va falloir mobiliser les moyens pour que les pays africains aient la couverture maladie, c'est-à-dire que tout le monde ait accès au vaccin. Par exemple, si on a l'immunisation, ça peut être une petite solution. Ça peut être une solution, puisque si nous sommes en vie, on peut donc élaborer des stratégies pour aller lutter contre le changement climatique. Donc, dans un premier temps, en urgence, il va falloir donc trouver les moyens pour lutter contre cette pandémie et secondairement, venir à bout donc au changement climatique, notamment sur la question donc de l'adaptation et ensuite la résilience. Alors, voilà ce que je voulais ajouter.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Koku. And in fact, that comment that you just spoke about, I want to make a follow-up question, but this is to Professor Satish Kumar. In fact, the report is very clear that for us to finance, the recovery process, both from COVID-19 and from climate change, we need to mobilize domestic resources, but also international resources. And if you look at most of the countries in Africa, we are submitting, NDCs that are capital intensive, that will require billions and billions of dollars for us to be able to deliver. So what are some of the bottlenecks, when it comes to resource mobilization, both from domestic sources, but also from international sources? Professor Satish Kumar.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I think it's a very tough one. Let me attempt. I think I think for international resource mobilization, I think, I would say that within the formal negotiation processes, our negotiations have to be very strong to claim what is due for us. But also on the informal side, I think there is much needed public diplomacy that needs to be done, because I come to understand that the people in most of the developed countries, they really sometimes they do not have information of what their actions are causing and how we are impacted, so and why they should be part of the solution, and solution, and that they should also be contributing as a country. So I think I would say that when it comes to international resource mobilization, one, we may need to rethink our strategies of running advocacies and especially climate justice movement, because of course it's going to be a challenging, because as I said, PACJA has been very resilient in spite of all the challenges that we have. But I think maybe we need to be a little bit innovative in doing that, reach out beyond our continent into into the developed world. So that's when it comes to the formal and informal setting with respect to international resource mobilization. When it comes to national resource mobilization, I think partly I would say that there is lack of information and communication in many of our countries, because still I think yesterday I was privy to some of the discussions the youth did, and they were talking about the communities, and that they are not linked up nationally and globally. So many of the communities and many of the common people, I think still they may not necessarily be aware of how we are impacted and what we need to do in order to adapt. So I would say that one of the things in order to convince our people to actually do whatever it's possible from our side, even if it is providing providing the time to work. So in Ethiopia, for example, annually the farmers provide like 90 days of their time to support the government activities in terms of planting trees, in terms of water conservation and others. Even to do that, I think, of course, they are facing the trouble. They know they are facing it on hand on the ground, but still, I think there should be communication and information passing so that the whole country or the whole community are mobilized. And second, I would say when it comes to resource mobilization internally, I think the way we handle our industries and how they are taxed and how pollution control is done, those things need to be looked into, because I would say that for long we have not been following our own environmental laws. They are a little bit lax. So I think sort of the resources that comes from industries could also be mobilized. So I think I would say these are like my few comments. Charles, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Satish Kumar Bedathan. And now we want to open the floor to the plenary, because I'm sure there could be a few questions or comments from the floor before we release our good professors. And first on line, we have my sister here. She'll introduce herself again to us. And then from there, we have who else? We have President Jamshi. From there, we have our CLP from Nigeria before we go to Mamudu. So we start from my sister here.
Okay, thank you very much. I joined the earlier speakers to commend PACJA, the universities and other partners, as well as their funders, in taking the lead to contribute to the body of knowledge on the two major development issues and challenges of our time that are really threatening the existence of humanity as a whole. I would want to get some clarification on two major issues. Number one, I would like to know the extent to which the report addressed or focused on specific sectors of the NDCs, in maybe 1 or 2 countries or in all of them. And I mean, because that would enable us to contribute to evidence-based strategies in the revised NDCs. And also, as we are aware, this can enhance further advocacy and calling for policy reviews and all of that moving forward. So, and then secondly, I would like to know the extent to which issues of gender and social inclusion were given attention in the research study, because this will be very important also to contribute to the body of knowledge, emerging body of knowledge, in unpacking the nexus between climate change and COVID-19. Because we all know that the whole essence of such a study and also a discourse is to to examine the impacts on human development. And in that context, as CSOs and as Africans, we know where we are in terms of vulnerabilities of the continent as a whole, of individual countries, and of the persons, which is at the crux of the development agenda. So we need to, it would have been nice to see specific interventions in terms of, or additional, in terms of recommendations, and also, findings and recommendations, as well, or even if it just 1 or 2 case studies here and there, that would also enable us to proceed on how to demand for accountability from our state actors. And also to say that this is like asking PACJA for more. As the lead CSO on the continent, facilitating some of, a lot of discourse in this sector, especially it would be nice to see PACJA to, also commission a gender perspective study to unpack the issues of climate change and COVID-19 moving forward. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much. Those points are well taken. Augustine Jamshi.
Thank you, Chair, and I would like to thank the community, the academic community that took care of this kind of study. And as you said, Doctor, I would be very surprised if you found good literature on this. I think we are setting the pace, and this is something that we as the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance should be very proud of, because for the first time, an African civil society organization has mobilized the academics, both in Africa and abroad, to do a study that is very pertinent and urgent. And the results of this study, I promise you, will carry it further and further in our advocacy work. However, I'd like to also ask if your team, and this can be answered by the coordinator or anybody, whether you looked at those NDCs whose implementation were going to be a failure, COVID or no COVID. Because most of the NDCs in Africa were precipitated, and most of our countries were biting more than what they could chew and swallow, in the hope that the more they take on responsibility, the more money they will have. So in such a way that most of the NDCs were unrealistic, did your study kind of look at those NDCs whose implementation were going to be a failure anyway, COVID or no COVID? If we just allow it like that, it will be letting our governments off the hook of their responsibility because of some of these non-conditional or unconditional NDCs that since 2015 to 2019, they didn't do anything about. Could your study have highlighted some of those things? Thank you.
Augustine, we have our CLP from Nigeria.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Abubakar Omar, CRP Nigeria. I want to link two questions to Professor Kish Kamar and Tashin. You were talking about linking strategies and running advocacy. What linkage are you talking about? Maybe you could expatiate on that, because Africa, as you know, is the most vulnerable continent in the world in terms of climate crisis, in terms of climate challenges. So what link are you talking about? Are you talking in terms of technology, or what? I would need clarification on that. Then the issue of evaluating Africa's unconditional commitment on the NDC, revised NDC. There's an aspect African governments spend a lot of money on, especially in disaster management. Like, for example, in Nigeria, local governments, state governments, and national governments spend a lot of money in emergencies of climate disasters. If you accumulate that money on the African continent as a whole, is not small commitment as an unconditional commitment on their part. So I don't know if the study captured that unconditional commitment, so that it's not only about our conditional commitment, but we as a continent, we are also doing something in that direction. So I want to know that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll take the last question from Mamadou Barry, and I think we'll close the session so that Sarina can come back. So, Mamadou.
Merci Charles. J'en profite pour me présenter. Je ne l'ai pas fait ce matin. Je m'appelle Mamadou Barry. Je viens du Sénégal. Je suis le directeur exécutif de l'ONG Action Solidaire Internationale. Alors, je voudrais simplement, j'ai bien écouté nos chers professeurs par rapport à l'étude. Mais je voudrais fonder mes craintes sur les CDN, ou bien la CDN, les CDN, les contributions déterminées au niveau national. Comme vous le savez, je ne sais pas, peut-être dans les autres pays, mais le Sénégal a fondé sa CDN sur deux options. Option conditionnelle et option inconditionnelle. Quand on parle d'option conditionnelle, c'est lorsque le Sénégal, ou bien le gouvernement du Sénégal, reçoit de l'argent des partenaires. Ça pourrait lui permettre de réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre à X taux. Alors, et certainement, c'est comme ça dans beaucoup de pays. Mais revenons sur le but de l'étude, pour un peu analyser l'impact de la COVID sur, bien sûr, les changements climatiques. Moi, je voudrais peut-être penser à quelque chose, parce qu'actuellement, on parle de vaccins. Tous les États se mobilisent actuellement à acquérir des vaccins. C'est extrêmement cher. Et le problème, c'est que, justement, ces gouvernements sont partis pour mettre de côté la lutte, ou bien négliger la lutte contre les changements climatiques, au profit de l'acquisition de vaccins. Je voudrais savoir, est-ce que l'étude a montré, s'est intéressée à cette situation qui fait peur? Parce que de plus en plus, nous avons l'impression de voir que les États se rivalisent en termes d'acquisition de vaccins contre la COVID, en négligeant totalement, justement, l'urgence sur les changements climatiques. Et donc, voilà ce que je voulais, j'ai un peu écouté, mais j'ai comme l'impression qu'ils ne sont pas trop focalisés sur la SIDA. Donc, j'aimerais vraiment avoir quelques explications à ce niveau. Voilà, merci Charles.
Thank you, Mamoudou. And finally, we have Dr. Ezekiel Esmo.
Thank you very much, Charles, for giving me the opportunity to ask probably just two few questions. The first question is whether the research or the researchers have identified some distinctions in those pilot countries, those countries that you focus on the research. Are the impact similar in all the countries, or that there are certain peculiarities in the different countries with regard to the aim and focus of the research? And the second question, whether there are unexpected or unintended outcomes from the research. Now, are there certain discoveries that was never expected, but the research was able to discover that you can share with us so that now going forward, we would be able to integrate those new discoveries or outcomes in our intervention, or whether looking at the NDCs at the country level or in all our.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ezekiel. Now, I'll turn to my panelists here, and I'll start with Dr. Matal on the first and the last question. And the first question was about the gender consideration in the study. So how was that factored in terms of data collection and in terms of how the research was conducted? And I'm going to tie that one in with the issue or the question, or the two questions that were raised by Dr. Esmo. One of them being, were there some distinctions between the countries, or were the results homogeneous across the board? And of course, the other question is, were there some unexpected or unintended outcomes out of this study? Dr. Matal, if you can address those questions before we go to the other questions.
Certainly, and thank you. So in answer to your first question on the gender aspect of the study, I think it's a very important point, and is also a very critical point we always have to raise in research of this kind. Now, our study was mainly focusing on organizational activity, not necessarily the focus of their activity, but whether or not COVID-19 has affected their activity. Now, obviously, some of the organizations we talked to had gender equality as part of their mission statements. So when our conversations with them were around the lines of how has COVID-19 affected your activity, in which case most of these organizations who are looking at gender are also saying that this pandemic has affected their ability to do what they want to do. So that aspect is covered indirectly within the report. But we did ask African organizations about NDC priorities. And this is where we obviously saw, in terms of priorities which were said to be for their countries in each of these organizations, we saw very common themes. Agriculture, energy and forestry always came as the current priorities in NDCs and their perceived priorities in future NDCs. However, disaster risk reduction, biodiversity, health, and gender and vulnerable groups were selected more frequently as future priorities in their country's NDCs compared to their current ones. So in this respect, gender is one of the factors which were investigated as part of the study. But in terms of those sort of lived experiences, we were asking organizations about their activity opposed to specific projects on gender. But obviously we do know that from other studies which are coming out, the effects of lockdowns on domestic abuse, and as well as the programs which require consultations with groups who are more engaged in activities which affect women more than men, that those activities those consultations and projects have been disrupted. So in that sense, this is how gender comes into this study. In terms of your answer to the second question, was there any distinctions between the countries? The majority of countries reported that the coronavirus pandemic has negatively affected their NDC process. That was majority significant. The majority said that is definitely the case, and that was the case across all countries. Where we've seen some distinctions would be perhaps the lines on how much of a priority countries believe climate action is in their recovery plans. Only just over half of the countries in this study suggested that climate change was a priority in their recovery plans. But otherwise, majority seems to agree on exactly the role of civil society, the focus of the NDCs, as I said, both focusing on mitigation and adaptation equally. We see a lot of common themes. There are obviously a few divergence, but overall from the data set we had, there seems to be very much broad agreement of what the impact of COVID-19 has had on climate action in the 8 countries of which we studied.
Thank you, Dr. Matal. And now there was a question about pushing for accountability from our governments. Even though we submitted very ambitious NDCs expecting external funding, how do we push for accountability, Dr. Robert? How do we make sure our governments are accountable, in terms of fulfilling their commitments as stipulated in the NDCs?
Okay, thank you very much. I think to hold our government accountable in making sure we pursue the ambitions of our NDCs, the first thing I think we should do now that we have these NDCs or the revised versions of the NDCs or being revised them, just like the representative of the government said yesterday, one clear thing I think that should follow this is to have a kind of implementation plan or sectoral action plans for each of the different sectors of the NDC. If we have such action plans, in the action plans, it will be expected that we will see that from this time to this time, this is what we are expected to do. And this is what this particular stakeholder should do. So if we have such action plans, civil society groups working in the area of climate change in the different countries will have such action plans, and from time to time begin to track on their own the progress being made, the commitments of government in terms of local resources, at least to the unconditional commitments, to what extent these are being done, are they being done very well? So I think the civil society groups can also help in the advocacy in making sure that these things are being done the way it should be. Then on the part of the government, I think the government should also try as much as possible to commit the resources we need to implement the unconditional commitments we have made. The unconditional, at least, we should be able to do that. In doing that also, we will begin to see, at least from the budgets, that should be the very first thing where we will pinpoint to what extent government is being committed to the unconditional commitments we have made. How are our budgets reflecting the unconditional commitments on annual basis before we begin to talk about the conditional commitments. So for me, all hands should be on deck. Civil society groups lead the advocacy, make sure government is being committed to that. Government allocates the required resources to fulfill the unconditional commitments. And at that level, even those in academic institutions, ensure to your research and all that will be based around tracking the progress being made from available data at the government level or at the other stakeholders level. That way, I feel we will continue to move towards achieving the unconditional commitments of the NDC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robert. One final question now to Dr. Pierre. This question was raised by Mamadou Bari. You know, countries are now rushing to look for AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. So it seems the focus has now completely changed. Probably even resources are now going towards fighting COVID-19. So what is the fate of the climate change discussion, you know, and response to the same?
Est-ce que vous pouvez la reposer?
Well, I'm referring to the question that was asked by Mamadou Bari, that countries are now focusing on addressing COVID-19, buying vaccines, and so on and so forth. So what is the fate, you know, of climate change response? Because all the money seems to be going to addressing COVID-19.
Ok, merci pour cette question. Elle est vraiment très pertinente. Bon, en dehors de la COVID-19, la question vraiment elle est problématique. C'est même problématique parce que c'est un événement qui est inattendu, qui est venu et nous devons faire face à ça. Si on ne fait pas face à la question de Covid, d'abord je reviens d'abord à la Covid avant de venir au problème climatique, nous n'allons pas vivre. Alors si nous ne vivons pas, on ne peut pas résoudre le problème du changement climatique parce que c'est nous-mêmes les êtres humains qui allons pouvoir le faire. Alors au niveau climatique, moi je suggère au niveau des gouvernants, au niveau de l'Africain, d'abord d'inclure toute la population et de vouloir un dialogue direct avec même le paysan le plus bas, le plus pauvre qui est au village, c'est un village le plus retiré. Il fallait d'abord qu'il soit informé de la question du problème que nous avons. Parce que je vous assure qu'il y a certaines personnes qui ne savent pas. Il y a des populations qui ne savent pas. Donc, dans un premier temps, il va falloir informer la population de ce qu'il y a. Et lorsque la population est informée dans toutes les langues, pour que tout le monde soit informé, le même niveau d'information, et c'est à partir de là que on pourrait peut-être trouver des solutions. Une fois que l'information est portée, secondairement, on va passer maintenant à identifier les problèmes. Les problèmes qui sont rattachés au changement climatique. Parce que si le paysan qui est bien retiré dans un village, dans une contrée, qui est un agriculteur, et qui désormais il s'attendait à avoir une production dans le mois de juin, ou bien avoir une pluie dans le mois de juin pour faire son champ de maïs, et il voit qu'il ne pleut pas, peut-être que dans l'immédiat, il ne peut pas comprendre. Mais si on lui dit que certainement qu'aujourd'hui, c'est parce qu'il y a eu un changement du climat, que désormais, tu ne peux pas faire ton maïs en juin, mais tu vas le faire en août. À partir de ce moment, il y a une information. Alors, quelles sont les solutions qu'on peut trouver pour résoudre ce problème dans l'immédiat? Vu que nous, la population a besoin de nourriture, a besoin de maïs, alors on doit cultiver désormais le maïs dans le mois d'août. Maintenant, pendant ce temps, si la population est habituée à faire le maïs dans le mois de juin, et que désormais on doit s'attendre 2 mois après pour avoir le maïs, il peut y avoir une famine à ce niveau-là. Donc, tous ces problèmes qui sont inhérents aux différentes nations doivent être répertoriés. Il faut cartographier tous ces différents problèmes et trouver les solutions inclusives. Moi, je pense dans un premier temps. Voilà. Mais en amont, il faut résoudre le problème sanitaire. Parce que le problème sanitaire, aujourd'hui, est devenu une priorité. Si aujourd'hui les États cherchent les moyens, mobilisent des moyens, des fonds, et ils oublient le climat, moi, je pense, c'est mon avis, ça peut être ne pas la vôtre, je pense, le vôtre au moins, je pense que c'est un souci donc de pérenniser l'espèce. L'espèce humaine aujourd'hui est en danger. Nous sommes en danger. En dehors de la COVID-19, il peut y avoir certainement d'autres pandémies qui vont venir. Ça, c'est sûr, il va y avoir d'autres pandémies. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il y a certains microbes, certaines bactéries qui sont en train de se multiplier, certains virus sont en train de renaître à cause du changement climatique. Donc, aujourd'hui, dans l'occasion, c'est ce qui a été repéré, la COVID-19, mais pas d'autres encore. Donc, je pense que dans l'immédiat, il va falloir que la population ait l'information et qu'on trouve des solutions de manière inclusive. C'est ce que je voulais dire de manière résumée. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup.
Charles.
Oui,
Charles.
Thank you so very much. I know there's so many questions that people probably have, but I think we can continue interacting with our good professors, and I think we can expand this discussion.
Charles.
Remember also that PACJA has an NDC tracking tool, one of its kind in Africa, probably in the world. And I think we also need to make use of that tool, to push for accountability from our government. But I want to thank our professors, our good professors who were with me in the panel, Dr. Matal Sena, Dr. Michael Mikruetz, Dr. Robert Onyeneke, Dr. Koku Pierre, Professor Satish Kumar, and they were representing other professors. It's good to recognize, Professor Takui, working very closely with Said Chakri from Morocco. And thank you, Chakri, for joining the meeting online. We could see you there. And then we also had Wilfred Bekono, all the way from Gabon. We had Professor Patrick Bod from South Africa. And we had Professor Karuti Kanyinga from Kenya. And also we had Nyako Akua from Kwame Nkrumah University of Ghana. So thank you so very much for representing those professors who were unable to join us today. I want now to pass the mic to Sarina, who is going to come and conclude in 5 minutes so that we can quickly now look at our statement that is being finalized by our drafting team. I can see them out there now finalizing the drafting of that statement. Thank you very much. Sarina?
Thank you very much for the session. I really want to take a lot of thanks, give a lot of thanks to the professors of the 8 countries that did the study, including the teams from our national platforms, including the teams from our secretariat. I'd like to say thank you very much for that wonderful, wonderful work. Much more, I'd like to thank the professors who come here today. Dr. Robert from Nigeria, Dr. Pierre from Cote d'Ivoire, Kumar from University of Addis Ababa, and our 3 professors from Glasgow, Professor Tahsin, Dr. Matar, and Dr. Michael. So thank you very much for being here, and most of all, thanks also to Dr. Mwenda for the opening remarks. So great work today. What came out very clearly today in this conversation is that climate change is equally an emergency as the pandemic, as the COVID-19 pandemic, and should be treated as such. And if countries are mobilizing around the pandemic, countries should also mobilize around climate change. These are twin problems. They are this one and the same. So if countries are mobilizing finances for COVID-19, countries should also mobilize funds for climate change. So because really these two go hand in hand. So that is a message I think that we need to take to Glasgow in November, that we need to treat the two as emergencies, and more money should be put into this. And those countries that really committed to putting the $100 billion in the kitty should come through with their commitments. This is the time, and we are going to demand that when we get to Glasgow. I just wanted to make a last appeal around the gender issue, which of course did not come out very strongly in this study, but I think Dr. Matar also explained that very well, why it was that, why the situation was as such. But I think the lesson we take away from here as PACJA and partners is that coming in for the future, we're going to pay a lot of attention to the gender issues, whether it is in terms of our research, in terms of our documentation, or even in terms of organizing conferences like this, as the sisters were asking this morning. We will have sessions that really discuss gender and women issues as independent sessions, and that I'm committed, and that I will ensure that that is going to happen. So without much ado, I say thank you, have a great evening, and I do not want to give you longer sitting here. Asanteni sana.